On the morning of June 30th, 1940, at exactly 11 o'clock hours, a single Spitfire painted in a strange pale pink sped across the English Channel at 30,000 feet. Its target was the newly captured German naval base at Luftwaffe in Brittany, only 11 days after German forces had taken it. The pilot officer George Patterson Christie of the Photographic Development Unit should have been dead within minutes. One fighter, unarmed, painted in what looked like a child's bedroom color, flying deep into Nazi-occupied France in full daylight. Standard military thinking said this was suicide. Pink planes should stand out like a beacon. Pink was visible. Pink was exposed. Pink was wrong. But it wasn't. Christie finished his reconnaissance, photographed the whole base, and returned to England without any German fighters seeing him. Not because of luck, but because he was invisible. That strange pink paint, officially called Camo Pink and later PRU Pink, turned his Spitfire into a ghost. At dawn and dusk, against haze and low clouds, the pale pink didn't just hide the plane. It made it disappear. The feature that seemed sure to get pilots killed was what kept them alive. The Germans looked for blue-gray fighters against blue-gray sky. They never expected pink. This wasn't random or hopeful painting. This was optical science used as a weapon by an eccentric Australian named Sidney Cotton, refined through harsh trials and desperate experiments, and proven by reconnaissance pilots flying what they grimly called dicing missions, as in dicing with death. And the idea behind it would challenge all Air Force's beliefs about camouflage. When war broke out on September 3, 1939, the RAF's photographic reconnaissance abilities were dangerously weak. Their usual method relied on Bristol Blenheim bombers' slow, easy targets and fitted with defensive guns that made their military purpose obvious to any German fighter that saw them. In the first 4 months of the war, RAF reconnaissance planes photographed 2,500 square miles of occupied Europe. The cost was about 40 aircraft lost, most of them Blenheims. That meant roughly 1 aircraft lost for every 63 square miles photographed. At that pace, mapping Hitler's fortress Europe would destroy thousands of planes and kill their crews. Then came Sidney Cotton, the Australian aviation innovator who had already been flying secret photo missions over Germany in a civilian-registered Lockheed I-2 Electra. Cotton had proven a bold idea. Speed and altitude could replace armor and guns. An unmanned plane at 30,000 feet, flying over 390 miles per hour, could simply escape interception. The trick was making the aircraft hard enough to see so the enemy noticed it only after it had already passed them. On October 16, 1939, Cotton persuaded Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding to release 2 valuable Spitfire Mark Is from Fighter Command. These fighters were stripped of everything that did not add to speed or range. All 8.303 Browning machine guns were removed. Ammunition boxes were taken out, armor plates thrown away, and radio sets pulled to cut weight. The gun ports were filled with plaster of Paris and polished smooth. Extra fuel tanks were installed behind the pilot and under the wings. F-24 cameras with 8-inch lenses replaced the inner wing guns. The final result was a reconnaissance aircraft that could reach 390 miles per hour at altitude fast, enough to outrun the Messerschmitt Bf-109E, which topped out around 354 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, but speed alone wasn't enough. The plane still had to avoid being seen in the first place. Cotton's first photo reconnaissance Spitfires were painted in what he called cometant green, a pale light green meant for high-altitude missions. On November 18, 1939, Flight Lieutenant Morris "Shorty" Longbottom flew Spitfire NE-3071 on the RAF's first-ever Spitfire reconnaissance sortie departing from Lille-Secan in France to photograph ash in Germany from 33,000 feet. The mission worked. But it exposed a key problem. Different altitudes and light conditions needed different camouflage. Above 25,000 feet, planes looked like dark shapes against bright sky from below, or as tiny dark spots against clouds from above. At medium and low altitudes, between 5,000 and 15,000 feet, atmospheric haze dominated visibility. And at dawn or dusk, when the sun is low, the sky takes on a peculiar pink glow from UV light reflecting off clouds and moisture. Here physics becomes counterintuitive. The human eye doesn't see objects themselves, it sees reflected light. An aircraft's visibility depends not on its true color, but on how much contrast it creates with the background. Dark green or gray-blue camo works well against clear daytime skies. But against the pinkish haze of dawn or dusk, or low clouds lit by the rising or setting sun, these colors create strong contrast, appearing as dark spots against light backgrounds. Pink, on the other hand, matches the wavelength of light scattered by atmospheric particles in low sun conditions. The color wasn't chosen randomly. It was mixed to match the exact shade of diffused sunlight at dawn and dusk. The formula in the reference archive called for 1 part red, using standard RAF round red, to 10 parts white. The result was described by those who mixed it as an extremely pale pink-white, so delicate that it seemed almost white until compared directly to a white card. This was not Mountbatten pink, the brighter shade used by the Royal Navy on destroyers and landing craft. PRU Pink was much paler, chosen specifically for the conditions reconnaissance Spitfires faced, flying at medium altitudes, typically 5,000 to 15,000 feet, beneath or against clouds during hours when German defenses had difficulty spotting aircraft visually. The Photographic Development Unit redesignated a number, 1 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit, or PRU, on November 14, 1940, set up a detachment at Centreville in Cornwall specifically to photograph German naval installations at Brest. These missions were called dicing, short for dicing with death, because pilots had to fly low and slow over heavily defended targets while keeping precise courses for camera operation. Flight Lieutenant Keith Arnold, commanding the flight, watched pilot after pilot failed to return from Brest. In one particularly grim incident, Arnold requested reserve pilots from RAF Benson. 2 arrived, flew that evening to Brest, and neither returned. Losses mounted. 5 pilots gone in quick succession. Photographing the German battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, and dock facilities that the Kriegsmarine was rapidly fortifying. The pink Spitfires were a calculated gamble. They gave up high altitude and visibility, where they would appear noticeably lighter than PRU blue aircraft, in order to gain medium and low altitude protection. Pilots flew these missions during the golden hours when the sun hung low, casting Thatcheracteristic pinkish glow across the sky. The plane blended into the atmospheric haze instead of standing out against it. Consider a report preserved in reconnaissance records. Coming out of the clouds at 3,300 feet, a pilot encountered a pair of Bf-109s that passed just 50 yards away. Luckily, the Germans did not notice him. 50 yards, that's about the length of a cricket pitch. The Messerschmitts flew close enough that their pilots should have clearly seen the Spitfire's distinctive elliptical wings. But against the cloud-filtered dawn light, the pink paint made the reconnaissance plane effectively invisible. The color's effectiveness went beyond simply matching the haze. Pale colors white, very light pink, very pale blue have a secondary optical effect. They reduce the apparent size of an object in hazy conditions. Optical physicists understand this well. Pale shades scatter light in a similar way to atmospheric particles, causing the aircraft's edges to blur into the surrounding haze, making size and distance hard to judge. This principle led the RAF Coastal Command and the U.S. Navy to use white undersides on anti-submarine aircraft, reducing the range at which crews could spot incoming threats. Standard military camouflage in 1940 focused on matching terrain from above for bombers or the sky from below for fighters. Reconnaissance planes broke this rule. They had to be invisible from all angles, at varying altitudes, in changing light. No single color could do everything, so specialized schemes were created for specific missions. PRU Blue, a darker, richer blue, was approved for high-altitude work in October 1944, though it had been used since 1941. At 30,000 feet and above, PRU Blue aircraft blended into the deep blue of the high-altitude sky. PRU Pink, in contrast, was designed for low-altitude missions under 15,000 feet, especially when cloud cover was low and the sun angle was low. In North Africa and the Far East, where atmospheric conditions were very different from Europe reconnaissance, Spitfires used overall royal blue instead. Most pilots actually disliked the pink paint. It went against their instincts. One pilot said he felt the plane stood out like a sore thumb when taxiing or parked on the airfield. It looked ridiculous, unmilitary, even embarrassing. But combat results proved the scheme worked. Although exact loss numbers for pink versus blue Spitfires were not recorded separately, the PRU overall suffered some of the highest casualty rates of any RAF unit while still producing extraordinary results. From November 1939 to spring 1940, Cotton's small group of modified Spitfires, never more than a few operational at once, photographed 5,000 square miles without losing a single aircraft. That perfect record did not last. On April 10, 1941, pilot officer William Kenneth Manifold took off from Centevilla at 17:30 in Spitfire P9396 for a reconnaissance mission to Brest. He was intercepted and shot down by Lieutenant Hornberg of 2, JG-26 at 1925, crashing into the English Channel, north of Peasket. Neither his body nor the aircraft wreckage was found. It was Hornberg's second PRU Spitfire kill that day, but for every pilot lost, dozens completed missions that would have been impossible using standard camouflage. The key was matching the mission profile to the paint scheme. Pink Spitfires did not fly at high noon on clear days. That wasn't what they were built for. They flew at dawn, at dusk, and in marginal weather with low cloud. When atmospheric conditions turned that pale pink into perfect camouflage, what made the pink Spitfire effective wasn't just the color. It was the entire operational system built around knowing when and how the color offered protection. Three elements had to work together: the right color, the right altitude, and the right time of day. First, the color had to match atmospheric light, not terrain or open sky. Cotton and his team understood that cameras and eyes see differently, and that low-altitude haze during low sun angles produces very specific wavelengths of light. The 110 red-to-white formula wasn't random. It matched the observed hue of UV light reflection from clouds and moisture. Second, altitude had to be exact. Too high, and the pink Spitfire looked too light against the darker sky. Too low, and atmospheric haze could no longer hide it. The ideal band was 5,000 to 15,000 feet altitudes where German flak was less accurate and where fighter interception required more time to organize. Third, timing was vital. Dawn missions launched when the sun was 10 to 15 above the horizon, creating maximum atmospheric scattering. Dusk missions planned returns for similar conditions. Cloud cover was preferred, not solid overcast, which blocked the target, but broken cloud between 3,000 and 10,000 feet, offering both concealment and UV reflection. The Spitfire platform also played a major role. The Merlin engine's two-stage supercharger allowed quick altitude changes. Climb to 30,000 feet to cross the channel unseen. Dive to medium altitude for photography, then climb back to safety on the return. Its speed meant German fighters had very little time to intercept. Even if they managed to spot the aircraft. Intruder, the polished surface reduced drag and, more importantly, prevented ice crystals from forming, which could make the plane sparkle in sunlight. Compare this to German reconnaissance doctrine. The Luftwaffe used fast bombers like the Junkers RU-86P and RU-88, relying on altitude alone for protection. These planes flew at 40,000 feet and higher, where thin air made interception difficult. But they were large, relatively slow, and created noticeable visual signatures. British fighters eventually developed high-altitude variants, like the Spitfire HF-Mk7 with extended wingtips, specifically to counter these threats. On August 28, 1942, a single RU-86R bombing Bristol from 42,000 feet killed 48 people. High-altitude PR Spitfires later intercepted and shot down several RU-86 Rupees at extreme altitudes, effectively ending the German high-altitude bombing campaign. The PRU method was more advanced. They used multiple altitudes, specialized camouflage schemes, and precise timing to make detection almost impossible. High-altitude missions used PRU Blue. Low-altitude missions used PRU Pink. The planes were modified for each role, some optimized for range, like the PRMK-4 Bowser with 114 gallons of internal fuel. Others for low-level oblique photography, like the PRMKV with side-mounted cameras. And others for medium-altitude work, where pink camouflage provided the best concealment, creating an effective reconnaissance. Spitfire required removing roughly 450 pounds of military equipment and adding back about 200 pounds of cameras and extra fuel. The weight reduction directly improved performance. A standard Spitfire Mk carried 8.303 Browning machine guns, about 140 pounds in total. 2,400 rounds of ammo, roughly 190 pounds. Armor plating behind the pilot, around 73 pounds. And full radio equipment, about 50 pounds. Removing all of it freed. That weight reduction increased top speed by about 18 miles per hour and, more importantly, extended range by roughly 50%. The PR Type B, introduced in February 1940, carried an extra 29-gallon fuel tank behind the pilot, raising total fuel capacity to around 114 gallons and giving an economical cruise speed of 210 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. This provided endurance of about 3.5 hours and a range near 735 miles. The PRMK-4, entering service in October 1940, extended range further with fuel tanks built into the wing leading edges. Total fuel capacity reached 229 gallons, enough for 7-hour missions covering 2,000 miles. On one of the PRMK-4's first sorties, a reconnaissance Spitfire flew to Stettin on the Baltic coast and back, a round trip of over 1,400 miles. The cameras themselves were precision instruments, requiring careful handling. The f2.4 camera, with an 8-inch focal length lens, could capture details as small as 3 feet from 30,000 feet. The f52, essentially a 36-inch telephoto lens the size of a small telescope, could resolve details under 2 feet from high altitude. But these cameras faced two main problems: fogging at altitude due to temperature changes, and vibration from the aircraft. Cotton solved fogging by routing warm air from the engine's cooling system through ducts across the lenses, preventing condensation. This innovation, developed during his pre-war secret flights over Germany in the Lockheed Electra, became standard on all PRU aircraft. Vibration was addressed by mounting cameras on rubber shock absorbers and requiring pilots to maintain perfectly steady flight during camera runs. Even slight deviations from straight and level flight could cause a mission to fail. The pilot's role during Reconnaissance missions was extremely demanding. Flying solo without radio communication early PRU, Spitfires had their radios removed to save weight. The pilot spent up to 7 hours in a cramped, unheated cockpit. During that time, he had to navigate by dead reckoning, maintain precise altitudes in courses, operate cameras, watch for enemy fighters in the rearview mirror, monitor contrails that could reveal his position, and manage fuel carefully enough to return safely. Navigation mistakes could be fatal. Several PRU pilots simply vanished over the North Sea or Channel, likely lost after missing their return points. The pink paint itself required special handling. It was applied in multiple thin coats over polished aluminum, then buffed to a semi-gloss finish that minimized drag while preserving the correct optical properties. The paint naturally dried matte, so achieving semi-gloss demanded careful polishing with fine abrasives. Too glossy, and the aircraft would glint in sunlight. Too matte, and it would appear darker than ideal. Maintenance crews developed methods to touch up paint damage without disrupting overall color consistency. Interestingly, the exact shade of PRU Pink changed slightly over time. The earliest batches, mixed to Cotton's formula, appeared almost white with a pink tint. Later standardized production produced a slightly more saturated pink. Neither matched the bright Barbie pink seen on some modern model kits or restored aircraft. Careful analysis of contemporary photographs, accounting for orthochromatic and panchromatic film stocks used in the 1940s, shows a very pale color lighter than aluminum, but clearly not pure white. Fine intelligence gathered by pink Spitfires directly shaped major military operations. In May 1940, a PRU Spitfire photographed roughly 400 German tanks hidden under camouflage nets and trees in the Ardennes forest, revealing the concentration point for the Wehrmacht's breakthrough that would bypass the Maginot Line and split Allied forces. The images showed tank formations, supply depots, and fuel stocks, confirming German plans to attack through terrain previously considered impassable for armored units. On February 22, 1941, Flying Officer William Kenneth Manifold flew a dicing mission specifically requested by Dr. R.V. Jones, the British Scientific Intelligence Officer. His target was a German radar installation, a Freya early warning radar near the French coast. Manifold's photographs provided the first clear images, showing the radar's distinctive dish antenna and supporting equipment. These images allowed British scientists to assess German radar capabilities and develop countermeasures. After completing his photographic run, Manifold, in violation of PRU doctrine but showing the aggressive spirit of reconnaissance pilots, strafed the radar station, temporarily putting it out of action. The most crucial reconnaissance focused on German naval facilities at Brest, where the battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau posed a huge threat to Atlantic convoys. Pink Spitfires flew repeated dicing missions over Brest, photographing ship positions, defensive setups, and battle damage from RAF bombing raids. These low-altitude, oblique photographs from side-mounted cameras captured details impossible to see from high altitude: dock layouts, anti-aircraft gun placements, camouflage netting patterns, and whether the ships were actually combat-ready or undergoing repairs. In December 1943, photographs taken by PRU aircraft allowed Constance Babington Smith, a British photo interpreter to identify a V-1 flying bomb on a test stand at Peenemünde, Germany. This discovery confirmed intelligence reports about German secret weapons and triggered Operation Crossbow, a major Allied bombing campaign targeting V-weapon production and launch sites. Without these photographs, the V-1 campaign against Britain might have achieved complete surprise. The Menzendam, target of the famous Dambusters raid in May 1943, was extensively photographed by PRU Spitfires before and after the attack. Pre-raid images showed water levels, dam structure, and defensive positions. Post-raid photographs confirmed the success, showing water rushing through breached walls and flooding. Downstream. These images were immediately used for bomb damage assessment and later as historical documentation of one of the war's most audacious raids. Throughout the war, PRU Spitfires flew roughly 16,000 operational sorties, providing an estimated 80% of all Allied intelligence gathered in Europe. The unit suffered some of the highest loss rates of any RAF organization, reflecting the extreme danger of flying solo, unarmed, deep into enemy territory. Yet the intelligence gathered was invaluable. As one RAF officer said, "We sent the bombers where the PRU told us to. Without reconnaissance, we'd have been bombing blind." The PRU's combat record highlights the ruthless mathematics of aerial reconnaissance. From November 1940 to October 1942, when one PRU was disbanded and reorganized into 5 separate squadrons: NAS 540, 541, 542, 543. And 544, the unit lost around 50 aircraft and pilots on operations. That's roughly 1 loss per 320 sorties, a casualty rate of 0.31% per sortie. By comparison, Bomber Command's overall loss rate during the same period was about 3.8% per sortie. Reconnaissance pilots flew far fewer missions than bomber crews, but each mission penetrated deep into enemy territory without the protection of formation flying or defensive armament. Dicing missions, low-altitude reconnaissance flights over heavily defended targets, were particularly dangerous. These missions required pilots to fly steady, predictable courses at altitudes where anti-aircraft fire was most accurate and fighter interception easiest to coordinate. The pink camouflage offered concealment, but no real protection. If spotted, the unarmed reconnaissance Spitfire relied solely on speed and maneuverability. Several factors contributed to PRU survivability. First, reconnaissance pilots were chosen from the most experienced fighter pilots and given additional training in navigation, camera operation, and tactics to avoid detection and escape. Second, missions were carefully planned using the latest intelligence on German fighter positions, radar coverage, and anti-aircraft defenses. Third, aircraft were maintained to higher standards than typical fighter squadrons. Engine reliability was critical on 7-hour missions over enemy territory. The specialized camouflage schemes were effective. While precise statistics comparing pink versus blue Spitfire losses don't survive, pilot memoirs and after-action reports consistently describe pink aircraft completing missions at dawn and dusk with fewer interception attempts than planes using other camouflage schemes at similar times. The optical physics worked as intended. When used in the right environmental conditions, pink made the aircraft extremely hard to spot. One notable example occurred during the period when Cotton's small flight of modified Spitfires operated from France, November 1939 to May 1940, covering roughly 5,000 square miles of enemy territory. Not a single aircraft was lost to enemy action. The flight evacuated ahead of German advances during the fall of France, with only 1 aircraft damaged. In an air raid at Heston Aerodrome in September 1940, but operational losses during active reconnaissance missions remained 0. This flawless record stemmed from Cotton's understanding that camouflage, speed, altitude, and timing functioned as an integrated system rather than separate features. The Pink Spitfire succeeded because it rejected conventional military thinking about camouflage in favor of optical physics. Standard theory assumed aircraft should match terrain when viewed from above or sky when viewed from below, optimizing for specific viewing angles under specific conditions. The PRU approach recognized that reconnaissance aircraft operated under variable conditions, different altitudes, times of day, weather, and viewing angles from multiple directions. No single camouflage pattern could cover all scenarios. Instead, multiple specialized schemes were created, each optimized for specific operational profiles. High-altitude work used PRU Blue, low-altitude missions in European maritime climates used PRU Pink, and low-altitude work in the North African desert used Royal Blue. Each scheme matched its environment. This approach relied on understanding that human vision and cameras detect contrast, not absolute color. An object becomes visible when it contrasts with its background. The pink paint didn't hide the Spitfire by blending it directly with terrain or sky. It concealed the aircraft by matching the wavelengths of scattered light and atmospheric haze during low sun conditions. The Spitfire vanished not by looking like something else, but by appearing like nothing at all, empty air. The Royal Navy independently reached similar conclusions, painting destroyers and landing craft in Mountbatten pink, a brighter, more saturated shade than PRU Pink for Mediterranean operations. The long-range desert group used pink-painted trucks and Land Rovers in North Africa. In each case, the reasoning was the same: pale pink matches the scattered light in desert haze or early morning and evening atmospheric conditions better than any other color. Modern militaries still apply this principle. During the 1991 Gulf War, RAF Jaguars, Buccaneers, and Tornado GR.1 aircraft were painted with a pink-tinted desert camouflage, echoing the PRU approach. The color helped aircraft blend into desert heat, haze, and dust clouds stirred by operations. Fighter pilots reported difficulty spotting friendly aircraft even at relatively close range during low-altitude missions. The core lesson: effective camouflage requires understanding the exact conditions under which the object will be observed. No single camouflage works everywhere. The Pink Spitfire excelled in its operational niche medium altitude, dawn or dusk, maritime atmospheric conditions, but would have been glaringly visible in other situations. The brilliance wasn't just the color, it was matching that color perfectly to the mission profile.